In 1994, a group of archaeologists were digging through the Atacama Desert in northern Chile. They weren't expecting much, just sand, rocks, dry air. But then one of them stopped. He brushed away a thin layer of dust, and underneath it, a human hand, still intact, skin still on the fingers, nails still attached. The body beneath it was over 7,000 years old, and it looked like the person had died last week. No ice, no chemicals, no preservation techniques, just a desert so extreme, so ruthlessly dry that it does something no laboratory on Earth can fully replicate. It stops time, not in a metaphor, not in poetry, literally, biologically, chemically. It freezes the process of decay and holds a human body in near-perfect condition for thousands of years. Scientists call it natural mummification. But when you see what this desert actually does to a body, and how many bodies it's been silently holding onto, you realize this isn't just a scientific curiosity. This is one of the most quietly astonishing places on the planet, and most people have never heard of it. The Atacama Desert stretches along the western edge of South America. It sits between the Andes Mountains and the Pacific Ocean, and it holds a record that no other place on Earth can claim. It is the driest, non-polar desert in the world. In some parts of the Atacama, it hasn't rained in over 400 years. Not a drizzle, not a passing cloud, nothing. The air there is so dry, so empty of moisture, that bacteria, the tiny organisms responsible for decomposition, simply cannot survive. And without bacteria, a body doesn't rot. It dries out instead, slowly, completely, perfectly. When archaeologist Mario Campagna and his team uncovered that body in 1994, they initially thought it was a recent burial. The skin was leathery but whole. The facial features were still visible. The man's expression was almost peaceful, but carbon dating told a completely different story. This individual had been lying in that sand since roughly 5000 BC, before the pyramids of Egypt were built, before the wheel was invented. He was part of a group called the Chinchorro people, ancient fishermen who lived along the Atacama coast. And here's where it gets strange. The Chinchorro didn't just accidentally mummify their dead. They started doing it intentionally, deliberately, on a massive scale. They were mummifying their dead over 2,000 years before the Egyptians even began their first experiments. But their methods weren't spiritual rituals or religious ceremonies. Their methods were something far more disturbing. The Chinchorro weren't a mysterious or isolated tribe. They were ordinary people, fishermen, fathers, community builders. They lived along the Atacama coast for thousands of years. And somewhere around 5000 BC, they started doing something that no other civilization had ever attempted before. They began taking their dead apart, completely. Archaeologists discovered that the Chinchorro would carefully remove the skin from a deceased body, then the muscles, then the organs. They would clean the bones individually. Then they would rebuild the body from the inside out. They used sticks and reeds to reconstruct the skeleton. They packed the body cavity with ash, soil, and dry grass. Then they carefully replaced the original skin back over the frame, like wrapping something precious, like they were trying to bring the person back. Some mummies were even given clay masks, shaped to resemble the dead person's face, painted in black or red, colors that held deep meaning for the Chinchorro. When researchers first saw these reconstructed bodies, they were stunned, not just by the preservation, but by the care, the detail, the amount of time and effort each mummification required. This wasn't a quick burial ritual. Each body took days, possibly weeks, to prepare. And they weren't doing this for kings or priests. They were doing it for everyone. Infants, children, elderly men. Every member of the community received the same treatment, which raised one enormous question that no researcher could initially answer. Why? What drove an ancient fishing community to develop one of the most complex preservation rituals in human history? The answer, when scientists finally pieced it together, changed everything they thought they knew. For decades, researchers assumed the mummification was religious, a belief in the afterlife, a way to honor the dead. That was the easy answer, but the easy answer was wrong. In 2012, a team of bioarchaeologists from the University of Tarapacá began studying the bones of the Chinchorro mummies more carefully, and they found something inside the bones that nobody expected. Arsenic. Massive amounts of it. The rivers and streams flowing down from the Andes into the Atacama were naturally contaminated with arsenic, a toxic element that leaches from volcanic rock. The Chinchorro had been drinking it for generations, and arsenic poisoning at high levels causes one specific, devastating consequence. It kills infants. It causes miscarriages. It cuts a community's children down before they ever have a chance to grow. Researcher Bernardo Ariasa spent years piecing this together. His conclusion was quietly devastating. The Chinchorro began mummifying their dead not out of religious belief, but out of grief. Raw, desperate, community-wide grief. They were losing their children at staggering rates. And the desert, instead of letting those small bodies disappear, was naturally preserving them, drying them out, holding them in place, so the Chinchorro could keep them. They could carry their dead children with them, keep them present, keep them visible, part of the community even after death. It wasn't ritual. It was heartbreak turned into tradition. But here's what makes this story even harder to process. The mummies they were carrying around, some of them had been dead for years, and the community didn't bury them, not for a very long time. Archaeologists found evidence that some mummies had been repaired, multiple times. The skin had been restitched, the clay masks retouched, the internal packing replaced. This wasn't preparation for burial, this was maintenance. The Chinchorro were actively caring for their dead, the way you care for something still living. Researcher Arthur Aufderheide, one of the world's leading mummy experts, examined over 280 Chinchorro mummies during his career. He noted something that deeply unsettled his entire team. The wear patterns on the mummies suggested they had been moved, repeatedly, carried from place to place, sat upright during gatherings, positioned among the living, for years, sometimes decades. To the Chinchorro, the dead weren't gone. They were still present, still part of daily life, still members of the community who needed to be looked after. And the desert made this possible. Because without the desert's extreme dryness, none of this could have lasted more than a few weeks. But the Atacama held everything together. It kept the dead looking almost alive. And that created something researchers hadn't anticipated when they first began excavating. A problem. A serious, modern, urgent problem. Because the Atacama isn't staying the same. The climate is shifting. Humidity levels in the region have been slowly rising over the past 2 decades. And what took the desert thousands of years to preserve, it's now taking only a few years to destroy. Mummies that survived intact for 7,000 years are now deteriorating faster than scientists can study them. Skin turning black, features collapsing, structures dissolving, and researchers are racing against something they cannot stop. But the decay itself revealed one final secret hidden inside these mummies, something no one had been looking for. As the mummies began deteriorating, scientists scrambled to document everything. High-resolution scans, DNA extraction, tissue sampling. And inside the degrading tissue, they found something that stopped the research team cold. Ancient DNA, intact, readable, preserved for thousands of years inside the desert-dried cells. And when they sequenced it, they discovered that the Chinchorro people didn't disappear. They didn't vanish like so many ancient civilizations. Their genetic line continued, directly. Modern residents living in the small coastal towns of northern Chile today carry Chinchorro DNA. The descendants of these ancient mummy makers are still there, still living along the same coastline, still drinking water from the same rivers. When local historian and archaeologist Ivan Munoz shared these findings with communities in the Arica region, something unexpected happened. Older men in the community said they already knew. Their grandfathers had told them stories about the old ones who kept their dead close. Oral history and genetic science had arrived at the exact same truth, from completely different directions. And that is what makes the Atacama unlike anywhere else on Earth. It doesn't just preserve bodies, it preserves memory. It preserves connection. It holds on to the evidence of how people loved each other, thousands of years before anyone thought to write it down. A desert that receives almost zero rainfall became the keeper of humanity's oldest documented grief. And it's been holding that grief in perfect silence for 7,000 years. Some places on Earth don't just exist, they remember. And the Atacama remembers everything. If this story stayed with you, you're in the right place. Subscribe so you never miss what we find next. We cover real events, forgotten histories, and the kind of facts that make you stop and think.